So two things came up that I thought was worth just exploring. One was around what I consider sort of overwhelm. When we look too far over there, it's really difficult to focus on what we need to focus on. And the way that I deal with that is think about what can I do in this relationship right now? And I keep it that simple in terms of thinking about creating change. But sometimes that can be painful. And so it's easier to look far away rather than in the moment. The other thing was around cross-culture and the differences that we have. Someone pointed out to me that America's not really had much in the way of war. That there is each country has its own historical backdrop. So I've done work in Australia and in Pakistan and now the States. So I'm getting a bit of a global kind of idea about the relevance of thinking about ACEs and trauma. What's the relevance of it? And what's intergenerational trauma look like? I mean, if you want to see a really traumatized country, go to Australia. Quite a strange thing to say, you might not think that. But what that country, what the policies of that country did to the Aboriginals is really the nub of trauma. And then, of course, there are people carrying the history of slavery, people carrying the history of separation, of loss of language, loss of culture, loss of religion. What they did with the Aborigine people was they took the children, stole them, literally, if you're interested in this, watch the Rabbit-Proof Fence. Stole the children and put them into white children's homes, really. Not even one family, but lots and lots of children. That was what happened there. And then on top of that, in Australia, you have the fact that it's made up of petty criminals from the UK. I don't think they really put like murderers and stuff. It was people stealing food because they were hungry. There's also a history of children in care being shipped out to farms in Canada as well, in Canada and Australia, who were then abused. So in that sense, we all have a very different intergenerational carrying of trauma. And that's worth thinking about when we're thinking about how we deal with the stuff that's in front of us. Pakistan also, when you're going into Pakistan, they had partition in 1971, which ripped the country apart into India and Pakistan, ripped families apart because the British said, right, the line's going to be here, and just ripped entire communities apart. So when I go over there and talk about ACEs and trauma, I have to really kind of think about what does that look like when I'm here. And that's such a different society than this society. America is an individualist society where the whole grit thing comes from. It's all about the power of the individual. And if you're not trying hard enough, if you're not getting somewhere, you're not trying hard enough. And then you go to Pakistan and you try and run a session on self-care and say, how do you find some me time? And they're like, what does that even mean? Me time. There is no me. I am in relation to the community. I'm here to serve my community. So again, it's entirely different. And I don't have all the answers to that. I just wanted to bring that into the room because I think it's really important. Okay, so I'd like you to work on tables for a bit. And the question I'm posing to you is, what do you understand about safety? What does safety look like, feel like, mean? What is safety? So I was wondering if you could just, on your table, just come up with just have some conversation about safety and what it means for you, and then we'll take some feedback, just for 5 or 6 minutes or so.
We had several different answers, but kind of started in a broader sense of maybe you're feeling safe in the community you live in, or maybe even just the neighborhood, or you feel safer in the back of your house more than the front of your house with more windows and things like that, or even just safety of self, of being comfortable in who you are and the choices you make, and safe with that. And what's that? Setting boundaries and be safe inside your boundaries. So we kind of had a broader spectrum and narrowed it down a little bit to be safe within yourself and your feelings and your boundaries.
And that's what's so interesting. Every table will have thought about it in a different way, which is interesting. Yes?
We talked a little bit about emotional safety
Mm-hmm.
and kind of how important it is for people to think of that as being just as important as physical safety for so many reasons, and kind of expanding their definitions. One of the things I see when I work with people a lot, and this happens sometimes in the schools, is, well, they're safe. Like, well, they're physically safe, but they don't feel safe emotionally, and that's leading to a lot of the things that you're seeing and unsure of how to deal with. And so making sure that there's conversation around that and validity behind if someone isn't feeling safe emotionally, what that means and what that looks like.
Yeah, because as we've already identified, a child, for example, is unlikely to come up to you and go, do you know what, I'm not feeling safe. I'm just not feeling it. It's not going to happen. So yeah, thank you for that. Yeah?
So we kind of, we had 4 things in general, but really kind of focused on 2 of them. The 4 things were stability, trust in surroundings, basic, like building blocks of just food and shelter, and those kinds of things, and sense of community was kind of how we combine all of it at the end. But we really talked a lot about stability, and also on the emotional health thing, we talked a lot about how, about anxiety just in general, that really is fear, just fear of something that you aren't sure what you're scared of sometimes.
Yeah.
And how that anxiety can end up being comorbid with a lot of things and end up escalating other things that are going on when you don't have these things around you.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. Thank you. So when you walked in here today, I want you to really just break this down, right? Really break this down. What signs were you looking for that this was going to be okay? Other females. What else? Familiar face? Yeah, so scanning the room and going, oh my God, oh hi, I haven't seen you in ages. Okay, what else?
Being able to sit in the back of the room and have your back close to the wall.
Yeah. Listen, you don't need to tell me about the whole back to the wall thing. I'm a back to the wall person, and I hope I was gentle with you because I'm a back to the wall person.
She'll get over it by a month.
Yeah, but that's something that I'm very aware of. So that's brilliant, thank you. Anything else that you look for? Yes?
Having eyes on the doors.
Eyes on the door, so you know how to get the hell out of here. Yeah, I was at a conference actually, and I was speaking at a conference, and they showed a film, and I found the film very triggering. And they hadn't given a trigger warning about that particular film, which I was quite upset about. And I was sat where you were, and the door was over there, and I couldn't get out. And I felt really cross that had not been set up in the way that enabled anyone who was going to be triggered to make sure that they were close to the door so that they could leave if they wanted to and just go and get a cup of tea. No drama. So thank you for that. Anything else?
Oh, when I walked in and saw food.
Food. Food, yeah, food helps you feel safe because it means someone's thought about your needs. Doesn't it? Yeah.
The sidewalks being clear and stuff, so I'm not going to kill myself tripping on the ice.
Yeah, so somebody took the time to clear up so someone thought about you, they held you in mind. Same with you. You were held in mind. Very powerful. What about a smile? Did anyone look at somebody and want to see a smile? But it's true, isn't it? You know, sometimes if you look at someone and they don't smile, I've got this terrible habit of making sure I smile at people who aren't smiling in the hope that they may smile back to me. Have you got something you're thinking of that you were looking for? Okay, so there's a lot of things there that we do very quickly that we don't necessarily break down and think about that actually is about us making sure that the environment is a safe place for us to be. And we do that like that. The other things that we do, we want to know, when are the breaks? When am I going to eat? Where are the toilets? And can I park? There's all these things that we do. But in terms of the people that we're walking into, making sure that somebody's giving us eye contact and someone's smiling, these are important clues and factors. Now, think about where you work. And think about who uses your service. How much work have you put into your services to make sure that there are environments where people can wander in? You have, good, I'll come to you in a minute. Where people can come in and they have the opportunity, because as we're going to learn, actually, if you've got historical unresolved trauma, actually reading those signals is really hard. So we have to work much harder at putting those things in place. Who's got a service where you've actually thought about making sure that those things can be met? Who's working in a service like that? You are? You are? You are? Okay, so quite a few of you. So that process, does anyone want to share that process, how you did that? Just for people who haven't done that in their service. So we can put that on the end of the list for the end of the day. How do you actually make an environment somewhere that is conducive? Would you like to share, yeah?
I made sure my office is calming colors, and I
Yeah.
also make sure that it's not cluttered with things so they don't feel overwhelmed, and it is kind of small. So if I feel it seems like someone's a little on edge, I'll make sure to ask, do you want the door opened or closed? I also have stress balls available, so that's helped some people if we're talking about something that's a little triggering or makes them feel vulnerable, so they can use a stress ball.
Lovely. And it's one of the things that we just don't always think about. You know, I was working with the probation service and they were working in environments that are very open plan, and on the wall are pictures of people injecting themselves. So I'm kind of thinking, we've got some work to do here really in terms of what messages we're giving out to people who are coming into this service, to use this service.
I was going to say that we totally lost my train of thought. I'm sorry. I was listening.
I do that all the time.
But really, because we really focus on building community within within the organization and connectedness, that the most valuable information and the most valuable changes that have happened with building a safe environment comes from the women themselves. And so, and being open to listening to that, and then helping make it happen if they don't have the resources to make it happen. You know, if I can be that resource, and but having them be part of the process and being heard.
Yeah.
So that's,
and that's key. And actually, I was talking yesterday I was doing Dr. Molly's TV show thing, which was a bit uncomfortable. And we were talking about that because I don't know what you think about this, and we're going slightly off-piste with safety, but I just really want to draw on that point. If you have a service and people with lived experience are not integral to the creation of that service, then A, it's not trauma-informed, but B, you're doing a service to people, not with them. So already you're setting up the intention that that is not something you're working on together. You're already saying, me and you are different, I'm us and you're them. So thank you ever so much for that. I'm going to talk a bit about that this afternoon because I genuinely feel that that is something that is not happening properly and fully. So it's really wonderful to hear you say that. So we're going to just dive into Stephen Porges. And I don't know what you think, actually. What about this afternoon? Do you want to look at the safety thing further in terms of in your services, or do you feel like that's something you don't need to look at, or how you bring in lived experience into creating services? Is that something you want to look at in the last bit? I'm not feeling it. Okay. We'll see. We'll see what comes up. So, Stephen Porges, polyvagal theory. Chuck knows about it because I'm getting on a plane tomorrow, so get his number if you want to know more. The vagus nerve is very important because it goes to every part of the body. Vagus is Latin for wanderer. And you might, if you've done yoga or mindfulness, come across having what's known as good vagal tone. So how the vagus nerve affects all our organs, it's around our heart, liver, gut, inflammation, blood vessels, mouth, brain. These are all the aspects of our body that we want to be in good operation. So, who's done biology? Okay, so the ANS, the autonomic nervous system, has traditionally been seen of as having two strands. Stephen Porges would argue that there is a third strand. So we have the sympathetic part of the system and the parasympathetic part of the system, which is our fight, flight, freeze, survival system and our rest and digest system. What he is saying is that there is also the social engagement system. And some of what we were talking about safety, is around social engagement. And you spoke about smiling. Think about smiling. Which is part of that reading, that social engagement, that I am safe, this feels safe. Now, I know it sounds really obvious to smile, but how many times have you gone into a doctor's surgery or a school or somewhere and you're not smiled at, you're not even looked at, and how that makes you feel? So imagine if you're somebody and you have that unresolved trauma, it tells you this is not a safe place. This is not a safe place. Social engagement is the core teaching that translates his cutting-edge research into meaningful clinical and human practice. But it hasn't been included in the technical criteria for inclusion, has it? As far as I'm aware. Do you think it has? I don't think it has. I think I saw him being very cross about it, that it hadn't, because he feels that it should. So that ability to read somebody for safety, he calls neuroception. Neuroception. Which describes how neural circuits distinguish whether situations or people are safe, dangerous, or life-threatening. So think about that in a law enforcement setting, what that might look like, what that's attached to, how that works. Because you don't walk into a crime scene and smile, do you? It's not happening. Neuroception explains why a baby coos at a caregiver but cries at a stranger, because they have all of those signals that the person that they're with is safe. Or why a toddler enjoys a parent's embrace but views a hug from a stranger as an assault. That might be. And he argues that faulty neuroception might lie at the root of several psychiatric disorders. I don't like the word disorder, but I think what he's saying is that faulty neuroception, that inability to read whether a situation is safe or not, may sit underneath some of the things that we give labels to. And that makes sense, really, doesn't it? If you can't read whether a situation is safe or not, and if you've had a lot of trauma, then every environment that you're going in is potentially going to be a threatening, traumatic environment. So you don't know when to be in a place of fight, flight, or freeze. So I'm going to play a video in a minute, because he's done a 5-minute video last year on what this actually means. And I was going to try and appraise it, but actually I thought, why? Because it's better if you listen from the horse's mouth, so to speak. So, environment outside the body and inside of the body. The nervous system, the neuroception, working out whether it's safe, dangerous, or life-threatening, which will determine then whether you spontaneously engage another, whether you become defensive in your fight, flight, or freeze, or you shut down. So, here's the man himself.
I'm talking about the circuits that are being regulated, the brainstem that regulate our underlying state, percolating information up to the brainstem, and the brainstem it clearly is transmitting that information to higher brain structures, enabling access to different brain areas. So that when we're in safe states, we can access higher cortical functions, but when we're in dangerous states, those systems turn off and we're defensive. If we think of this triangle, each time we get higher and higher, we have greater diversity of expression and outcome. So I'm talking about basically 3 states that provide a neural platform for great diversity of expression. If you are in a constant dangerous environment, your nervous system is going to find it difficult to detect safety. So if it can't detect safety, it's going to be in the state of more fight, flight, a low threshold to react. And when you're in that state, you're going to misread other people's cues. So you're more likely to see neutral faces as being aggressive. You're more likely to see fearful faces as if they were angry. So you can really confound difficult relationships. So you won't be able to use people to self-regulate. They'll become threatening and reactive. So if you have a history in which there is no experiences of using people to regulate in a very pro-social positive way, people will then become threatening or damaging to you. And what I always want to emphasize is that the social interactional behavior is a neural exercise. It's a neural exercise of using newer mammalian structures, it says evolutionary newer structures, to inhibit very primitive defensive systems. So if we feel that we're in safe environments, we'll use our face, we'll use the intonation of our voice, and we'll negotiate a relationship or maintain safety by doing that. And this is what friends do, this is what lovers do, this is what supposedly teachers are supposed to do, and therapists, right? If we're a little bit in a more dangerous situation, like a novel environment, we don't know anything about it, we'll go into another physiological state of support, fight or flight, mobilization behaviors. And if we can fight or flee, get away from something, then we've actually negotiated the danger. But what if we can't get away from the danger? What if we're held down, or we're in a confined environment? What if we're trapped in a car, or a plane, or in a bathroom, and someone is now going to hurt us? Possibilities that we could trigger a third circuit which shuts us down. And it's that shutdown circuit that makes it so important in understanding trauma. And the polyvagal theory articulates that shutdown circuit, while most other theoretical models of trauma and what people would call stress disorders only talk about a fight-flight system. Okay, so that's the core of what I would call personality, polyvagal theory. And the second component of that core is that these responses are not voluntary. Our nervous system is picking up information in the environment and evaluating that information, not on a cognitive level, but on a subconscious, we want to bring back that term, but on a neurobiological level where we're picking up features of risk or danger. And our nervous system puts us into those different states. And we can become aware of that because when we're in certain environments, we may feel our heart pounding. And we ask the question, why is my heart pounding? And then you'll say, well, something in the environment must have triggered it. But often we don't know the cues that trigger these things. So the point I want to make is first that the polyvagal theory provides us with an understanding of 3 neural circuits that support different types of behavior. One is social engagement behaviors in safe environments. The other is fight, flight, and mobilization behaviors. And the third one is really a shutting down, a second level of defense.
Yeah, you can see why I didn't want to appraise that. Does anyone want to watch that again? It's quite difficult. I find his theories quite difficult to grasp. I've met him, I've listened to him, I can't read his stuff. It's incredibly scientifically academic. He hasn't made it straightforward, like, say, Segal or Bessel van der Kolk or any of those writers. But I think his theory is really important, but it's harder to get your head round. I'm happy to put it on again if you want to. Is anyone feeling that they'd like it again? No. Okay. I will watch that several times. You know a bit about polyvagal theory. Is there anything that you can add at all to that simplifies, in ways that you've simplified it? Do you want to?
I'm not an expert on polyvagal theory, but I just went to an event that Tanger Place put on, and one of the speakers actually I think was from Mount Mercy, who talked about polyvagal theory and talked about it with educators about how literally the student cannot interact with you if they're in severe fight, flight, or they're shut down. You've got to do something to get them back before they can respond at all. And so and this was a session with trained psychologists, school counselors, and they did role playing, and almost none
Our nervous system.
almost none of the people could do it. Because our reaction is to get control. And I mean, all these trained people literally could not do it. Because when the presenter presented as someone who was at the ultimate of fight or flight or shutting down, the first response of the responder was to gain control of the situation. And what was needed was to have the person be seen, have the person feel safe, be touched if needed, something to get them to get back into the social system, because literally they're shut down. And I know Molly couldn't attend that session, but that's what I remember.
It's perfect. Yeah, absolutely. And that's the other assumption that I made, I think, as well, that people understood that if somebody is in their stress response system, it's an automatic system. It's not in the cognitive part of the brain. And yet one of the things that happens in schools, which is a great example, is teachers speak to the cognitive part of the brain. Well, if you do this, then this is going to happen.
That was the response.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, if my terror could speak, it would say, I don't care. It's irrelevant to me, because right now I'm out of it. And it's an automatic part of the system, not a cognitive. So you can't get cognitive with somebody until there's a feeling of safety. Not anyone, not me, not you, not one human, because that's not the way we're built. So if you're in that automatic place, you can't talk about anything. And that's really difficult in services, isn't it? Because in services, you have this list of things and you need to talk about them, and we need to talk about them now, and we need to do this. But actually, that's not how it works. Yes?
So how do you, this is something I run into a lot, is with behaviorists.
Yeah.
They're very much oriented to the, if this happens,
Yeah.
then
Stickers and charts and all that nonsense, yeah.
that does not work with
Yeah.
what was just described. And I think that that's where schools get really, 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 really stuck.
Yeah.
And unintentionally cause harm to kids that have a lot
Yeah.
of trauma.
Yeah.
And so I'm just curious, like, have you gotten into some of those conversations with people that are oriented from that perspective?
Oh my God. Yeah, I mean, welcome to the world. Yeah, absolutely. And like the rest of the world on just about every issue that we have, it's kind of 50-50, isn't it? So, I mean, the thing is that it's not about one person. So where it gets really difficult when you go and do training in schools, or you go and do training with people who are much more of the pastoral element of schools, what happens is they go back into their school all fired up, they've been to the training, they're really excited, they go back into the school, and what they're confronted with is a culture, a behaviour policy, and all those other things. So what I would say is that you have to have an environment, it's a whole shift in culture. And now I've stopped going into schools unless I've spoken to the senior leadership team and I'm clear that it's part of their vision and their mission, because it's too painful to stand in front of people continuously having a conversation that's underpinned by compassion, connection, trauma-informed practice, trauma-sensitive approaches with people who want to put children in isolation rooms. Yeah. I'm not doing it anymore because my life is too short. So what I would say to you is, pick your right fight with your right place. If somebody is inviting you in, you're looking at changing a whole service, a whole culture. So you need to have everyone on board when you're doing that. And that's how you change behaviour policies. That's how you change the way that an environment is set up. That's how you change making space for relational approaches to behaviour. That's how you make changes to have clinical supervision that make sure that when people's buttons are pushed, they've got somewhere of taking that. Okay? That has to be a whole service, whole school approach. Yes. Okay, yes. I'll come to you.
As an educator, it's a hot topic here today as far as schools. But what some people don't know, social emotional learning is going to be part of the classroom setting, all right? And I have it. There's educators that are getting educated in it. As a school counselor, it's part of my office, it's part of my mission. So it's in schools. It's in schools, but when you have a classroom size of 30 to 35 students, and you have curriculum and you have standards that you have to meet for every child to be successful educationally, those are some of the barriers that teachers have within the four walls of their classroom.
Yeah, and that's absolutely, and those are the kind of things that have become very difficult because a lot of those things are imposed on externally onto schools through what resources are decided go into that school, what staffing levels are like in that particular school. Because if you really had a trauma-informed, trauma-sensitive school, for example, then you would have a much deeper staff team. Because one person in a room of 30 to 35 brains, right, is not reasonable. And I think I'm really glad that you brought that up because that's something that comes up all the time, and it's important that we keep that on the table because otherwise we end up with a group of people who feel demoralised, incapable, but actually you're doing something that isn't possible. So these are tensions. I don't have any answers for them. I don't expect any of us do. These are tensions between that Venn diagram I showed you at the beginning of individual, of community, and of society. And if you're in a very overwhelming environment, and not all schools are, you know, each school has a different community, has different issues, different things to deal with. If you're in a community like that, if you're in a school that has a lot of need and a lack of resources, then you can only focus on what's in front of you. You have to do that and hope that you get a senior leadership team that really wants to shift how you do things because everyone has to be part of that. Okay, anything else? Yes.
From a business perspective, there are a lot of small business owners that want to set goals, reach them, and keep maintaining those things, but if they're not dealing with all this other stuff, then they're not able to achieve those goals. So when I meet with people, they say, this is what I want to do and this is what I want to accomplish. Mm-hmm. But then we end up talking about their relationship with their spouse or a childhood trauma that is still holding them back. Mm-hmm. So this theory is like our intuition, our gut, is our body is able to read that situation long before our brain catches up. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so what does it all look like in terms of how we create those relational opportunities? What does understanding the social engagement theory look like in practice? What does it mean? So, non-judgmental, agenda-less presence. Now, that's one of those sentences that sounds quite straightforward, but actually is really difficult, isn't it? Because if we're working with somebody, we've probably got an agenda of things that we need to do and things that we need to approach. Meeting somebody exactly where they are in that moment. Again, it's one of those things that, you know, sounds quite simple, but it's quite difficult to meet somebody exactly where they're at. That's why 35 people, that's very difficult. So the nervous system of the other person, when we do that, their nervous system settles into our nervous system, and we create that opportunity for safety. To be fully present, we need to have some ground on which we stand, a knowledge of what of what we own, of what it means to be human, what it means to heal, to have some humility. Some of the stuff that's been coming from that table, I feel very much about that in terms of your service, the way you've pulled that together. The language we use is often about how we disconnect rather than connect. Connection is a biological imperative. That's Bruce Perry's line, I think. You're familiar with Bruce Perry's work? Born to Love? It's all about empathy and connection. And then The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog came later. Great book. We're all doing the best that we can based on our neurobiology, and this is how we create safety, and safety is what allows people to open up. So what I would ask for you is to go back onto your tables and think about safety again in terms of what we've just done, and think, maybe do a piece of paper that's split down the middle. What do you do really well now in your services, and what could you do better? What do you do really well in terms of creating safety, creating space for meeting people where they're at, creating space for connection, and what could you do better? You do that for sort of about 10 minutes. In fact, does anyone want to move table? If you don't want to move table, don't, but if you're feeling like you'd like to go and meet up with another service and see what they're doing, it's an opportunity to go and move table.
A good connection, what we're doing it.
A good connection, yeah.
People we're in our community, building trust. Building trust, yeah, we talked about that.
So connection and building trust is something that's going well. What would you like to do better?
I want to personally learn new strategy. I have a good connection. I teach first grade, so I have a connection with my children. I love them and I want them to feel safe, but I need new strategies so that I make I
Yeah.
don't internalize it all. I want to help them more.
Behavioural, meeting behaviour in the moment in a way that, yeah. And I think that conversation that we just had earlier hopefully was a bit helpful about that, and how challenging that can be if it's just you. Is it just you, or is it your school? Yeah, something to think about, yeah. What did you come up with over here?
Creating choices are positive and doing well,
Yeah.
and improving on increasing our knowledge around diversity.
Improving and increasing knowledge around diversity. Are you noting this, or shall I get two spaces at the back with the...
I'm doing some, but let's put it up where everyone.
Yeah? So can we have one side with things that are going well, so that people have the opportunity to share what's working, and then one side with what we can do better, so people can see what we're all working on? Brilliant, thank you. Do feel free to pop those on the back when there's a thingy up, and you as well. What about this table?
We said what we do well is the awareness of the environment, and I think we said we know what we do well as a strength and what we need to continue to work on, but we're aware of that. And then what we need to do better, we had kind of two, like collaboration with all providers in the community, and then being patient with the clients and meeting them where they're at. So we kind of have a strict policy in our community. If they cancel, then we're not going to see them, but sometimes it might take them 3 times to get through the door, and that's meeting them where they're at. So we need to do better at that.
Yeah, that is a quality point, because there are lots of services that do that. You can't work with us if you're not sober. You can't come here if you haven't, you can't come here for housing if you're homeless. I'm being facetious, but you know what I mean. Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much. What about this table? What's going well? What are you doing well?
Again?
You got it there.
I kind of compared 2 of the programs that I oversee. I think Mobile Crisis does things very, very well by design at meeting people where they're at. It's a low barrier program. It doesn't matter how much money you have, where you are, if you're sober, if you're not sober, where you are in the community. All of those things that I think are really wonderful. And then I look at our program like Youth Shelter, where I constantly feel like a failure on a daily basis, because similar to schools, the system, the institution, the contract that drives that programming makes it very difficult to deliver services to youth in the way that that I want to deliver them, and that they should be delivered for those kids.
Yeah.
And and I'm an administrator, and I feel tied, I would, by the contract. So then even, at that level where you should be in a position to be able to really say, no, this is how we do this. The funders and the contracts are so specific that
Yeah.
it's like you have to walk away from the funding source altogether to be able to change the system, to have it be what it needs to be for kids.
Yeah.
And it's something I battle all the time.
That sounds like quite a big thing to deal with. So I'm wondering what collectively, if that's something that we can look at later on. Because this is part of a 6-month program, I'm wondering how this becomes a collective of people coming together to deal with some of those issues that are much bigger. Because that's so big, that's why you feel so overwhelmed, isn't it? You know, that's such a big thing.
Thank you for validating. It's all very good.
Okay, so that's something we can think about on the need to do better side of things. What about this table?
We talked about treating people with dignity.
Yes, treating people with dignity.
And then I work at a free clinic in town, and one area that we're really working to improve on is looking at the social determinants of health. So not just seeing individuals as, oh, you have high blood pressure or diabetes, but seeing the social determinants of health that surround them and beginning to support patients in that so we provide more holistic care.
Okay. Just interesting about that. I'm just curious about where do you sit here in terms of feeling like you're activists in your roles? Yeah, I kind of knew you were going to look at me like that. Because there's an element of being an activist, isn't there, when you're the voice of vulnerable people who are experiencing really challenging points in their life. And that's something we've lost quite a lot of, actually, in the UK, especially in social work tradition, which has a history of activism. It's getting very lost. But I wondered where that sort of sat with your... Go on.
One other thing that we talked about here that kind of relates to the activism piece is, I work for Horizons, and I oversee 2 programs, our Survivors program that works with victims of violent crime, and then our Family Support program, which has family support workers going to the homes of parents with young children. And I feel like I am in constant activist mode. And part of that is just because my training and my background is in victim advocacy, so that's just part of the nature of it. Versus social work, which is a little bit different. And so, like, when we were talking about things we could improve on, one of the things that I think about in our organization as a whole, we offer a lot of different services. So in addition to our Survivors program and our Family Support program, we also have therapists on staff, and we also have the Financial Wellness program, and we also have Meals on Wheels for elderly folks. So when it comes to safety, I feel like my team in particular, we are always on advocacy and activist mode, because sometimes things that are thought of that would be good for the greater organization, we don't always think about how that might affect people already receiving services. So if we have people walking into the building who are surviving family members of a murder victim, and let's say we decide to explore serving, defendants or ex-defendants or probation and parole folks. Like, what's going to happen when the family of a murder victim walks in the building and a defendant walks in the building at the same time? Like, that's actual physical safety I think of, but more so emotional safety.
Absolutely,
like, those
yeah.
kinds of things aren't always thought of when you have a larger organization offering multiple services.
So what sentence can we put that in? Because that's so important.
I think it's the kind of the basis of being trauma informed, like as an organization.
Yeah.
A holistic.
Yeah.
I don't know.
So you got quite a bit of work to do with your organisation, is what you're saying.
We're actually really good at most of it. We really are. I just think about the folks we already serve.
Yeah. Okay, brilliant. So that's, you got that. Okay, what about this table? Thank you.
I think we're like in different organizations, but we all sort of talked about how the connections and the relationships are really important to have that sort of like non-judgmental presence for even like if your coworker's having a bad day, to have being a safe space for the coworker to come in and be able to have someone to vent to or talk to feel safe and then
Yeah.
go about the day. It's the connections and the relationships part.
Thank you. I'm wondering, is it, because you've just raised being from different organisations, is that, have you done lots of stuff as different organisations coming together and then continuing the work afterwards? No, yes, yes, no, don't know. Because I'm finding, yeah, a little bit. A lot on paper, yeah. I'm just finding the energy in here is really flat, and I don't know if it's me. Is anyone else feeling that? You're feeling it as well. So I'm just wondering what that is, if that's because it's lots of people you haven't worked with before, or the expectations of the day are not being met, or... Yes.
I think for me, it's kind of the enormity of the tasks that are before us.
Yeah.
I think we all have interest and excitement in making changes, but to me, it feels overwhelming.
Okay.
And it feels like I almost just sit here and go, oh, there's so much that we need to do, that it almost feels like it's choking me, if that makes sense.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
So,
Yeah?
One of the things, and sometimes I get tired of saying this and people get tired of hearing it if I've said it before, but I am originally from the state of Iowa, went out to Colorado, worked most of my career there for 18 years and just came back to Iowa a couple of years ago.
Why?
But what I find very interesting, having spent my entire career there, is Iowa feels a little bit more oppressive to me. And not a little bit, actually a lot of it. The amount of innovation, the amount of collaboration, the way people collaborated, the energy around it, because they weren't so oppressed to be innovative and cutting edge and think outside of the box, changed everything. And I think that we have systems within this state that have been very oppressive for allowing people that really care about this work, that really want it to change, to be able to do that. And I do think that it's had an impact on people that have been doing this a very long time in this state. It has only taken me a couple of years to get a little bit discouraged about some of these things, but there's some major systems level, statewide, institutional changes that have to take place that create this overwhelm kind of feeling. And I'm a big proponent of there's always something you can do in your role, no matter what.
Yeah.
No matter what, there's always something you can do to move it forward. So that's not what I'm saying, but I think that is a reality that a lot of us face in our position.
And I don't think it's you, and I don't think it's the topic of the information. It is essentially where this whole thing has just gone. I'm just going to speak for myself, but I think we're the same way. Having worked for DHS, State Agency, Department of Human Services for 30 years, they suppressed creativity, they suppressed, I mean, I won't even begin to go on. But the fact of the matter is that I think we get into a situation, whether we work in a funded agency or whether in like a DHS or the public school system, whatever it is that it gets to the point where even when you want to do advocacy, even when you want to speak up about something, you're pretty much told that's not valued here. And so what I think you're sensing from us, the vibe right now is that ceiling. And we bump up against that, and I bumped up against it for 30 years. I have the scars to prove it. But that's, to to me, that doesn't mean I give up, and I think that's probably everybody. But it gets to the point of, okay, what do we do now? We know the ceiling's there, we know what our heart says we should be doing, but what can we do? And some of us are locked into, we're not gonna, what's the expression? Bite the horse's ass and beat us? I don't know.
Is that what people, does that resonate with most people, what's being said?
Yes.
Is there anything else that needs to be said
Earlier,
before I tackle that?
earlier when you said there's a disconnect, the Nubo area is so collaborative, that's just one area. That right there is exactly why the people here have the sense of we have to do it on our own, because there's not that collaborative area in all parts of here.
Okay, brilliant. Anything else before we get into that?
Our political environment, nationally.
It is huge. I had a conversation outside, and I don't want to get too into politics because we're a very divided globe. But of course, I live in a country that's doing its own madness. Yeah, and has a divide of the same space. Yes.
Well, and kind of along all of that, like, I know when I was a non-traditional student, so I've only been out of school for about 5 years or so. So I have my degree actually in social work and political science because I do consider myself an activist. But I know even when I was in school for social work, like talking about these big policy things. So we were talking about like the youth shelter and how like that's such a big thing. And it feels very overwhelming when you're always the one person that's speaking up. And after a while, you don't want to be that one person who's always saying something and then looked at like you're the complainer. If you're not trying to be the complainer, it's really frustrating and creates a lot of burnout for you when you're kind of running against the same systems. I know we were talking about kind of with some of the clients we work with, trying to get them into housing, when the housing, like HUD says like housing first, but then landlords don't necessarily look at housing first. And it's not that we can fault the landlords, that's how their stuff works, but then that's not how our program works. And so it's setting different guidelines than what we actually set for our clients. And it means that we have to pretty much tell our clients like, yes, this is what the program says that you're supposed to be doing, but this is the reality. This is what it looks like out there, is that you're not going to get into housing before you get employment all the time because there's only so much housing stuff that meets that need.
Yeah.
And I think that we're very discouraged to speak out. And if you're talking about something like DHS, some people like who work with government agencies, they're discouraged from speaking out sometimes because you're almost discouraged to speak politically, or there's a backlash if you speak something. Because no matter what spectrum you're on, there's definitely policies that will help or hurt the populations you work with. And sometimes people and agencies face backlash for talking about those policies.
Yeah.
So.
Well, now I know what's going on.
Not you.
It's not me, it's you. Now I know what's going on, and I don't want to lose finishing that exercise, but I just felt that just seemed like a useful moment to come in and just say what I was feeling. But now I know what's going on. This is, I'm now in familiar territory, right? This is what I come up and see all the time. In other words, you're normal. When I did the probation work, 900 probation officers, is that what you call it here? So people who are come out of serving sentences and living in the community, yeah. That was the hardest piece of work that I had to do because all the people were just so exhausted, that service had been so battered, and it took me until 11 o'clock just to kind of move us into a place where everyone had kind of felt that they were okay about being in the space. But you're much politer than they were, which is why I hadn't picked that up quite as quickly as I could. And what I'm feeling, and I don't know what you think about this, and I need to say something really that's I don't know what you'll do with it, but, you know, I stopped working in services. That's one of the reasons why, and I hate to say it, to you, but it feels disingenuous to not say it, because I couldn't cope with all that anymore. I just couldn't do it anymore. And so I became self-employed, which meant several years not eating. as I tried to build up my my working life independently, and we all lived happily ever after. You know, it's been nearly 10 years. But that was one of the reasons I came out of that work. So you have no idea how much respect I have for all of you. Ooh, sorry. Because when you do that work, and you cannot do it in a way that is congruent, and in a way that means that you can go home every day and feel like you've given your best, because you are all passionate people who care, right? You are driven to go and make a difference. So sorry, I didn't... I'm so English. And to not be able to do that is soul-destroying. It really is. So please don't think that I don't know that, because I really do. It's so hard. So what I'm feeling after that conversation, and I don't know if Molly can do something, because this is a 6-month program. I don't know if you can do something with that. But that's when you have to become a collective of some description. That's when people have to somehow come together, because you can't fight that on your own, because you end up self-employed like me. Depending on how old your kids are and how much time you're not able to spend with them because you're so busy trying to do all the other stuff that you're doing and all those other pulls on your time and your space. I don't know if that's worth something to think about. How can you be a collective in your area? I don't know enough about your area, which is always the difficult thing about going into an area to speak, which is such a privilege. But I don't understand the way systems work, the way you all work together, what's going on, things that you raise that I didn't know. Why would I know that? You know, so it's difficult. All I can do is facilitate conversations and facilitate opportunities to think about things in a slightly different way. So I'd want us to do that. I don't know what your thoughts are as you're standing there thinking about how the next part of the 6-month program looks like.
I think the afternoon they should discuss what groups are already formed and how can they come together.
What groups are already formed and how can they come together? Is that something you want to do? Because one of the things that I do know, having worked across many systems, is that people often don't even know what's in the local area. They don't know what resources there are. I mean, that was a simple thing that we did with the probation work. They didn't even have time to collect the information about who is in the area providing services. So one of my demands to remember that they paid me to come in, so the senior managers paid me to come in. So one of the things I said to them that they had to do was release time for the staff, for somebody to be able to go out and meet other people from other services, develop a database, make sure that other people know what's going on, and also build relationships.